Is there such a thing as too much luck? Is there such a thing as too much fun? Messing around, wondering how it's taken so long. I'm really so strong. It's not too much at all.
Welcome back to Too Much. We are here revisiting one of our favorite topics on this podcast, ambition. And we talked about it before as wounded ambition versus healthy ambition. But today our guest is Amina AlTai, who wrote The Ambition Trap, where she describes it as painful versus purposeful ambition. So welcome, Amina. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I literally feel like we were supposed to meet. We had a whole conversation before we hit record about all of the threads of fate that have brought us here.
Totally. We both went to the same alma mater. As I was reading her book, it was like I was reading what I had written. And it was so cool to have someone who's pulling at the same threads in different ways. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and then you'll hear more about her story and what this book is all about. So, Amina AlTai is an executive coach and leadership trainer, proud immigrant and chronic illness advocate, a leading coach to notable leaders, executives, and founders. Amina's mastery is in connecting us to our brilliance and teaching us to live and lead from it each day. She's the best-selling author of The Ambition Trap, How to Stop Chasing and Start Living with Penguin/The Open Field. Amina has partnered with progressive companies such as Google, Meta, Roku, Snap, Outdoor Voices, NYU, and Huge. She's an Entrepreneur Magazine expert in residence, a Forbes contributor, and was named one of Success Magazine's Women of Influence. Additionally, she's been featured in Goop, Well and Good, The New York Times, Yahoo, NBC, and Adam Grant's Next Big Idea Club, and many more. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's always so weird to hear your bio read back to you. I'm always like, make a note to shorten that.
Oh, no. This is actually perfect length. Some people's are very long and I have to edit a bit, but people do want to know. It's nice to hear your accomplishments and take, a minute to celebrate them.
Oh, love that. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're going to start at the very beginning about where our painful ambition stems from, which all of us, no matter what, have core wounds. We can't escape them. And so can you walk us through how you identified those core wounds in your book and how they may show up in our ambition?
Yes. Okay. So I always like to kind of level set by defining ambition. So I believe that ambition is simply a desire for more life. It's just a wish to grow, a wish to unfold. And when you think about that, that's inherent in every living thing on the planet, from plant babies to human babies, right? But we live in a world that makes ambition right for some folks and wrong for others. So, for example, women, people of color, other historically excluded people experience what's known as an ambition penalty, which is when you're penalized for your ambition. So, from the get-go, a lot of us already have this kind of like push-pull double bind relationship with it. Then to add a little more complexity there, I think that there's actually two orientations of ambition. So though it's neutral and natural and perfectly wonderful, it can come from one of two places. It can be painful ambition, which is driven by our core wounds, or it could be purposeful ambition, which is connected to our truth and comes from a place of wholeness. It's that more generative ambition. But painful ambition is driven by our core wounds. So core wounds, for anyone that spent time in therapy, you probably know what it is. But for those who don't know, it's the initial injury of the psyche. And it happens in our formative years, and it happens to every single human on the planet. So each and every one of us has at least one. I have 3.5, if I'm being honest. That half a one.
I think I have 3 or 4 myself. I was checking them off as I was reading your book.
Yeah. And so we have at least one, and you can have like literally the best parents on the planet and still emerge with a core wound just because it's such a human rite of passage. But also it could happen on the playground, or it can happen vicariously through watching somebody else have an experience, which is a really interesting one. So the 5 core wounds, actually, that's a body of work that comes from Lise Bourbeau, who's a Canadian psychologist. And she had highlighted these core wounds and the corresponding masks that we wear. And then I built upon that work. Is it helpful if I take everybody through them?
Yeah, please, just briefly. That'd be great.
Great. So there's 5 wounds: rejection, abandonment, humiliation, betrayal, and injustice. And as a result, we each wear a corresponding mask. So if you have an abandonment wound, the mask you'll wear is dependence, or you might, and that one's kind of tricky because it often shows up for really independent people, but it's in their closest relationships where they're overly emotionally reliant. Then there's rejection, which is one of mine. And the mask we wear is avoidance or withdrawal, where you maybe withdraw from conflict or avoid throwing your hat in the ring because you don't want to be rejected again. Then if you have a betrayal wound, which is where you felt like your caregivers didn't live up to expectations, the mask you'll wear is control. If you have a humiliation wound, yeah, I have that one too. If you have a humiliation wound, which is where you felt like your caregivers were embarrassed of you in some way, the mask you'll wear is masochism or martyrdom, where you're like, let me carry the weight. Let me be the one to do all the things, right? Let me take the hit. And then the last one is injustice. And so if you felt like your individuality in childhood was restrained in some way, the mask you'll wear is rigidity, AKA perfectionism.
Thank you for sharing those.
Which are yours?
I have a few, but it's funny because humiliation rings true, but it's not the mask I wore was not from humiliation. It was
Mm.
from my mother being so overburdened. I took on that role of perfectionism and martyrdom.
Yes, right? So, like, a bit of a parentified child, like, having to kind of step in and carry the weight. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
but definitely control, rigidity, perfectionism drag me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what's really interesting is so I've been in so many rooms this last year talking about the wounds and the masks, and I was in a room last week, and there was a lot of immigrants in the room, and the betrayal control one came up a lot, and this was interesting because I hadn't thought about this in this context, but they were saying that, and I have immigrant parents as well. They were saying because, like, growing up, their parents didn't really know, like, how to navigate the school system or what to do about sports, or they always had to control things because their parents
Yeah.
just didn't know. They weren't from here, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, that's such an interesting dynamic around the betrayal control because you wouldn't have I didn't think about it in that context."
Yeah, my mom's an immigrant, my dad's not, but it's like my mother was so overwhelmed with, like, 3 children, and my dad was a little, he was a little bit out to lunch emotionally, so my mom just carried a lot, and ultimately, I ended up being like that, where it was like, "I wanna do something over the summer, what am I gonna do? I have to figure it out." So I became incredibly hyper independent, my siblings emotionally took up more space, and so that's where you become more parentified, self-sufficient in a way that later sort of in some ways you excel at work and then in other ways it hinders you quite a bit. So,
Totally. You and I really are cut from the same cloth. This is
yeah.
so interesting.
Yeah, we will get to more of that in a second, but I want to hear Amina's story of how you realized your ambition was unsustainable.
Yes. Okay. So we talked about how we both went to NYU, and this was like 6 or 7 years after graduation. And I started my career in marketing and, was just the consummate high achiever, very type A, and was told, like, hey, just keep your head down, work really hard, like, especially as the child of immigrants. And was like, my parents always instilled in us like a really strong work ethic. And if you do these things, you'll have this outcome. Right. So I was like, cool. If that is success, I'll do it.
Mhm.
And so I ended up working really hard and, kind of like first one in, last one out vibe. And then 6, 7 years into my career, I started to get sick. And at first I was just like swatting away the symptoms. Like, I don't have
Mhm.
time for this, like, shh, body. And then they got so loud that I couldn't ignore them. And so I went to the doctor, and it was actually the seventh doctor that I'd been to who gave me a diagnosis. But she called me on a Friday as I was driving to a client in Connecticut. And she said, Amina, if you don't go to the hospital now, instead of going to your client, you'll be days away from multiple organ failure. And so that, as you can imagine, really reoriented my relationship to ambition and success. I call it my stop moment because it was literally the moment where I was like forced to stop in my tracks and look at the crossroads in front of me and say, do I keep going the way that I'm going, which clearly is not working, or do I choose another way? And thankfully, I chose another way. But here's the wild thing. I've only started telling part 2 of this story recently, is when I got that call from my doctor, I didn't go to the hospital. I went to work, and then, like, 8 hours later, after I
Right.
finally landed in my body, was like, maybe I should do something about this." So wild.
It's so crazy how many people on this podcast talk about their journeys and whether they become an entrepreneur or what their path is to their purpose. A lot of it is their body speaking to them, but they're not listening. And that was me too. That wasn't what changed my ambition. Mine was my company spectacularly failing. But prior to that, I'd had very bad GI issues my entire life. And they were completely exacerbated by my work environment. My body's completely different now that I've shifted how I work. And it's so crazy to be like, I was just bulldozing through really uncomfortable symptoms because I thought, okay, like it's a little bit of discomfort. And it was actually a lot of discomfort. Like now I can't believe I ever operated that way.
Right, we just gaslight ourselves and we
Mhm.
normalize it. So I've been sharing this story on lots of podcasts and stages, and so many people will come up afterwards and say, I have a similar story. And in fact, I met this woman who worked herself into a coma. So many of us just normalize or gaslight ourselves around these quite severe symptoms.
Yeah, and also it can be a long path to figuring out what is actually wrong. So I understand that it's easier to sometimes ignore it because it just feels like a lot of work to get right. But if you don't, you pay such a high cost. And so for you, when you checked yourself into the hospital, what came next?
Well, I ended up having to work with this hematologist because so essentially I had 2 autoimmune diseases that I didn't really know about, so they were mismanaged, right? And then I was like super, super malnourished as a result of it.
Mm.
And so I had ended up having to work with a hematologist to bring my levels back up, and I did that for a summer. But what was happening at the same time was I was having this like radical reevaluation of my whole life because I finally had my head on straight. Like what when you don't feel well and you are like operating in survival mode, you cannot see clearly. You think you can see clearly, and I totally thought I could see clearly, but I could not. So when I finally felt well, I saw the whole world differently. And I went back to school at the time to study coaching, nutrition, mindfulness, somatics, like all these things just to feel better for myself. And when I did, I was like, this is cool. Like, if I could teach this to other people and if I could mitigate the learning curve for other people so they don't have to hit a rock bottom, like that would be amazing.
Mhm.
But I wasn't quite ready to jump off the cliff. So I did 3 or 4 more years in marketing. And then finally, the universe makes no mistakes. My last role in marketing was honestly hellacious. Like, it was just so terrible that I was like, I just have to jump off the cliff and start this coaching business. And I'm so grateful that it was, because if it were a great role, I would have stayed there forever. I
Right.
never would have jumped off the cliff. So hindsight's 2020.
No, I understand that as well because I had a lot of corporate jobs that I just kept doing because I liked the idea of financial security. And then eventually I got to a place where I could make enough money that I can take the leap, but I was so afraid of doing it. And now I'm like, why were you so afraid of doing this? I'm exponentially happier. And I can see when I go back to do like over the past couple of years, I've had to do freelance jobs as well to cross the creative chasm, as I call it. And I can see immediately when I do these jobs, my body has a reaction. And it's crazy to watch and be like, "Oh, I just did this job and now I'm sick.
Yes.
I haven't been sick
So
all year." And that's what's cool about being able to be on the other side is you're just more in tune with what's working for you and what's not.
yep, absolutely. It's so wild.
So let's outline the principles of painful ambition. So you talk about this in the book. And for me, when I read these, and it was like the book was yelling at me, it was self-imposed urgency. That was definitely my number one. I read that and I was like, oh, that's a thing that you've identified. I spent the majority of my early career 100% available all the time, had zero boundaries, responding immediately. It was such a fast-paced environment, and granted, I was working in production, which is a urgent environment, but why did I choose that? Self-imposed urgency, number one, and then instrumentalizing myself, so you can explain that in 1 second, and then a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Those were my 3.
Yeah. And like I'm so glad that you're highlighting these, and you said were too, right? Because it's not an all or nothing proposition. I don't think we live entirely in purposeful nor painful.
Mhm.
We kind of jockey between the two, and environment is so important because, I'm an executive coach, but I'm also a leadership trainer. So organizations will invite me in to teach things. And sometimes I'll be in certain environments and I'm like, oh my God, I see my urgency coming up, or I see my narrow mindset coming up because the context is so important. So, okay, I'm going to take you through the full list. In painful ambition, we are unaware of the systems that shape our ambition. So we're just kind of oblivious. We're like, isn't everybody made this way?
Yeah.
We have this narrow black and white either or mindset. So the opposite of a growth mindset. We are driven by winning no matter the cost. And this one's important because I work with exclusively pretty much high achievers, and they're like, I love to win. So do I. There's nothing wrong with winning, right? It's the no matter the cost bit that is tricky because that's where we'll hurt ourselves and others to get to the win. Focused on individualism and hoarding power, right? Like, I need to shine. The power has to be mine versus being collaborative. And then instrumentalizing ourselves and others, right? That's my story too, like squeezing every last drop of productivity out of our bodies and brains to get to the goal and expecting everybody around us to do the same. It's very hustle culture. Living in toxic positivity. And so many people are like, why is that a problem? Because humans are meant to allow emotions to come and go, right? The healthiest humans on the planet are ones that make space for emotional diversity. So when you overgrip onto this state of happiness, actually that becomes a problem. And then self-imposed urgency. So moving at an unsustainable pace, right? Oftentimes because we're coming from a place of scarcity.
Those were very helpful to distinguish because even though I understand my wounded ambition and I've moved through it, it was nice to identify like these are the traits. So when they come up, I have better language now to be like, oh, that's that thing that I'm doing again. Or oh,
Yes.
be that person again.
Right. And I honestly, as a coach, I believe that awareness is 80% of it, right? Just start clocking the trait and noticing where it comes up and why. And oftentimes that is enough to shift. Some patterns are more deeply ingrained and take a bit more time, right? So I don't want to oversimplify, but awareness really is 80% of the work, in my opinion.
You can start to see the patterns in yourself more easily. And then my therapist and I, we talked a lot about, I guess it would go under, I don't know exactly what it would go under, but this, I probably control, but this idea of gripping your dreams too tightly and not giving them space and air to breathe. And so for me, that was a big thing that still, I'm like, what is the math between achieving and following my dreams and giving them enough space to be, right? Like make it happen, but don't try and control every aspect of outcome of what you're trying to build.
Yeah, so powerful, right? That is, I've lived the same way, and that is control, right? And control manifesting as a lack of trust.
Yeah. I was like, wait, you don't want to be like, just like do nothing. You can't just like do nothing and be like,
Yeah.
I trust the universe has it all figured out. But what is that sweet spot between both?
Yeah. Yes, okay, I trust that the universe is gonna work it out, and us not taking action is spiritual bypassing, right? We're like, "The universe has got me, I'm just gonna rest over here," right? Wish it worked that way, but we also have to take action, and so I think the sweet spot is taking aligned action, as I call it, but surrendering to the outcome, and the surrender isn't giving up, it's not waving the white flag, it's more quiet magnetism, it's more being in the feminine receptive versus, like, the hard charging, have to push to get what I want all of the time.
Yeah, that force energy is great for people to understand because that's a lot of it is the push, push, push versus not everything happens on our timeline. That's definitely something I have had to come to terms with is that everything happens, just not
Yeah,
necessarily when I want it to, but by
right.
allowing, like, even when I do my Substack, I have all these ideas for
Yeah.
posts and certain ideas speak to me later. So it's like I'll worked on something for 6 months, but it's not now's not the time to publish it. And then 6 months
Yeah.
later, I realize why because I found something else that makes that article more complete.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that level of, like, patience and yeah, it's, like, such patience.
I'm
Just
learning.
knowing just in the divine timing.
Well, I have a friend who was on the podcast who is it's the immersive episode. He's the godfather of immersive entertainment, and he's deeply prolific with tons of ideas. And one of the things he mentioned was, I was like, how do you know when it's the right time? Because for him, it's looking at the grid of life and saying, this is my idea, but this is the cultural inputs, and how do they coalesce to then create this cultural zeitgeist moment? And so he has to be patient because he's got to follow those trends and be like, this is the time. And I used to just be like, the idea, I want to do it. And now I'm like, actually, trusting that there's something percolating and you're going to know when it's the right time versus forcing it through is really interesting because I'm learning a lot by letting the threads just sit there and be like, when is the time?
Yeah.
Now is the time.
Yes, I love this so much. Can I share a story on this?
Please.
Okay, so you and I were rapping out about this before we hit record, but I feel like how my book came to be was actually quite divine because in 2019 I was working on a completely different book with a completely different agent. And we'd worked on the book proposal for a year. A year. And then March of 2020 rolls around just before we're about to take it to market, which is the beginning of the pandemic. And I get a call from my agent and she says, I can't take a risk on a new author. This time is so uncertain. And that's where we parted ways. And I get this call, like, while I'm walking around Brooklyn, I'm, like, literally standing outside a pizza shop, just ugly crying, being like, "Why, God, why?" And then a couple of days later, I got spiritual, I got on my meditation cushion, and I just had this deep knowing. I was like, the work is still becoming what it needs to become. It's not what it needs to be yet. And it was super interesting because in 2020, at the height of the social justice uprisings, I ended up coaching a handful of celebrity girl bosses who were canceled. And my book is not an analysis of cancel culture. But out of that experience, I put together my ambition framework because I was seeing
Mm.
things happening in my life that were happening in their life, just in a more exaggerated way, and in my other clients' lives. So it kind of crystallized this framework. And then I'm just minding my own business, teaching it for 2 years. And then a client of mine is like, "Where's your book? You need a book." And I was like, "Funny you should ask." And she was like, "Well, one of my really good friends just became an agent. She used to be a Buddhist meditation teacher. And like, for anybody knows me, that's so up my alley. And then I met this agent, we hit it off. We worked on the proposal for 2 months, and then we sold it the first week we took it to market. And I share this story because it's like I pushed and forced with the first version so hard and it just did not go anywhere. And then I literally surrendered, allowed the work to become, and then it just flowed when it was supposed to. And I have to retell myself this story as a reminder of the divine timing. Like, keep showing up, keep taking the action, and then the ways and the doors will open.
Flow piece is so important. We're so cultured by capitalism to believe in this individual make things happen versus this idea that all of us have a rhythm of our lives and it's different for every person. And if you tap into your rhythm, your alignment, you will find things flow. My big thing around my ambition was learning that there's a difference between healthy resistance and gratuitous resistance. And I ignored gratuitous resistance for a very long time.
I love that. Wait, say more about that.
So when I was building my startup, 2% of venture capital goes to women. So I know I'm already like in this losing battle. I think I'm the exception to the rule because I'm so smart and so brilliant and blah, blah, blah. And then
Someone's gotta be the exception.
well, exactly. At that point, anything that I had succeeded in professionally was something I made happen. So I didn't let the container dissuade me, which is a good thing. At the same time, you break down the data. So 2% of venture capital goes to women. Of that data, obviously it's less for women of color. Then you look at when you're in gender neutral categories, your opportunity for funding goes down by 50%. And so I was a building and entertainment focused company. It wasn't beauty, it wasn't fashion, all that stuff that stacks the deck in your favor. And so we couldn't raise the capital, but I just really believed that what we were doing was worthwhile. I mean, I still do. I still think it was a missed opportunity. But then I was looking at the industry. Hollywood wasn't ready to change as evidenced by where the market is now. Hollywood is a diminishing business. And I was just like forcing, believing that I could control all of the variables, that if I got enough money, that then people would see what this product was. And the reality was it was a powerful tool that could have helped the business today be in less of a detrimental place. But the market wasn't ready. Venture capital was against me. And I was sitting there for 7 years pushing a boulder up the hill, believing that eventually something would shift. It was a very spiritual journey. I learned a ton, and that really was the point. But I look back and I'm like, I wish I had known that this was what we would classify as gratuitous resistance. This is no longer serving me. I'm past the point of healthy resistance. I'm just forcing, versus I was DJing the whole time, which was the opposite, which was just straight flow.
Yes, it's so powerful, right? The resistance that grows us and strengthens the muscle, and the resistance that is just throwing our weight against diminishing returns.
I really want people to understand that because it's a really good indicator. Like you're saying, like the book, like at a certain point, you like take a break. If it's meant to be, it's going to be, and it comes back around. And I think I'm a lot more willing to listen to those signals now than I was a decade ago.
Yes. Yeah, same. I mean, sometimes I'll go kicking and screaming if I'm being honest, but I've definitely got my ears open more than I ever have.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we're all human. You still want to make the thing happen. When this agent gave me feedback on the book that I'm writing, she's like, this doesn't quite make sense to me. I see you writing something different. And I knew in the pit of my stomach, she was right. But like you, I was like, I just want to do it. I've already written this 85-page book proposal. I've written 120 pages. Like, I'll just get it over the finish line. And then I was like, is that really what you want? Like, you publish a book. This is now a book that you can really use over the next decade of your life to talk about, be an expert on, be the person that people come to. And you have to be so obsessed with that book and the thing you wrote because it is going to be with you for a very long time.
Yes. And I feel so grateful that I didn't write that first book. Like, this is so much more substantive. This is so much more toothy. And yeah, like it was such a spiritual assignment and experience to write this book, not the other book. We can't miss our fate. I'm a firm believer of that. There's a beautiful book by Stephen Cope called The Great Work of Your Life. And he basically says, like, you can't miss your dharma, right?
It's
You
a
can't
great
miss-
book. I've read it. It's a great
Of course.
book.
We probably have all the same books on our bookshelf because we're the same.
After reading your book, I was like, we definitely have the same, we're in the same book club.
Probably the same therapist.
She's retired, sadly. I need a new one. So in capitalism, it's really challenging to navigate because we're rewarded for productivity and burnout. And so there's a perverse incentive to achieve. And so when we're training our brain to do the opposite, in the system we live in, we're going up against what the system rewards. So how do you suggest people navigate that when the system is rewarding you for something that ends up hurting you?
Yeah. I mean, it is really countercultural to move a different way because we are incentivized to hustle. We're incentivized to churn and burn. We're celebrated for it, right? Lack of sleep is a badge of honor. Overworking is a badge of honor. But what I have seen, and I have now coached thousands of people, is that like the opposite is actually true, right? In the years that I have worked the least amount and focused on my gifts, I have made the most amount of money. And I've seen, and you're nodding your head too, right? And I've seen this across my clients as well. When we focus on our zone of genius, which is our highest yield contribution, when we focus on work that is purposeful, when we're in that purposeful ambition versus painful ambition, there's just so much more flow. So, what we can contribute far outpaces what we can contribute in the space of churn and burn and working outside of our genius. And so, it's a bit of a lie, right? And the reason that so many of us are caught up in it is because our working that way supports somebody else's genius. And it's really hard to extract ourselves from the system that is rewarding us and trust that another way is possible. And so I'm actually curious how you learned to trust. But for me, it was in these, we'll find the smallest possible way. Okay, I can try this. Like I started my coaching business on the side while I still was doing marketing work, right? And then I was like, oh, I got one client, I got another client. And then over the course of a year, was able to replace my marketing salary. So I was building that trust muscle. And we need to see examples of it out in the world as well. And what we see a lot of is sort of the dysfunctional version. And so we need to have these like small doses to build the trust so we
Yeah.
believe we can actually move another way.
And I will just say it's just taken me a really long time to understand that. So my company shut down and I was really in a paralysis. I was taking consulting jobs. So the way that I frame it is it had to be energetically joyful or energetically neutral. So
Cool.
could not take from me. So a check, neutral or joyful. And that's what I did post company. And that year, paralyzed, not going for anything, had no juice. I made the most amount of money I'd ever made in my life. And it wasn't a lot, but it was the most I'd ever made. And I sat there being like, interesting. So it's
Yeah.
not about
Yes,
working
data.
harder. hmm
Yeah.
But that being said, control, control being my ugly wound. It took a really long time. When I went as a full-time creative, was only a couple years ago, and I will say it wrecked my mental health. It was really hard for me to go from having consistent income to being gig to gig. And it took a lot of talking to the universe. I'm very much that person. So there was a series of basically existential crises that happened over 2 years. I asked for signs. I'm in a place now where, because I wrote about this on my Substack too, but I had a big ask. Basically, it was like, if this is my path, show me these signs. And if it's not, I'll get a job. And the signs showed up, times 100, right? And they still to this day show up when I'm having moments of crises. I'll see my sign. And so I'm in a place now 2 years later where I'm not even remotely rattled by financial instability in the way that I was 2 years ago, because I have such deep trust that even I had a rocky patch last year where I told my mom, I was like, it's contraction before expansion, honey. I was like, I'm telling you, it's going to come back tenfold. Just trust. And then it did. And my mom, who has a scarcity mindset around money, was like, well, you were right to trust that it would come back.
I
And I
love that.
know that for my parents, that's so hard for them that I'm a creative, because they think of it as much more precarious and unstable. But my life is in a lot of ways easier doing what I do now than if I had stayed a traditional producer. I work less, I make more money, I have more of a full life. And that was because I took this risk. But I will say it took me a long time to master. My faith and trust was not something that was like a year, I'm good. It's taken a couple years to get to a place of deep faith.
Yeah, yes. I mean, I'm like, I've been in and out of entrepreneurship for 2 decades, and I feel like I am now in the place of deep trust. And I think that, especially with the money piece, it's twofold, really, where it's like there's a nervous system piece, right? So if your nervous system only feels safe around volatility, you're going to seek more volatility, right? And so we have to work at the level of the nervous system, but then also, well, what are the tactics that we put in place that allow us to thrive? Because as an entrepreneur, as a creative, the money is cyclical, right? You don't get a paycheck in your bank account every 2 weeks. And so you have to know, well, how do I put the buckets out when there's a lot of money so then I can pace myself when there's less, right? I think it's both nervous system and I think it's also the tools that we use.
Totally. What would you suggest for people that are maybe used to more volatility? What do you suggest to help us with our nervous systems?
We have to decouple the volatility, right? So it's like, well, how and why did you become accustomed to volatility? And how is that volatility no longer serving you, right? Maybe you can, I even got to the place where I was like, my nervous system can withstand it because I'm so used to it, but it's not serving me anymore, right? So if you've decoupled it from your nervous system and it's still not serving you, get to the root. Like, what is the story? And then what are the behaviors that are happening as a result of the story? And then can you actually switch those behaviors? And once you've switched to the level of the nervous system, switching the behaviors and the thoughts, I think are easier because I think it all stems from the nervous system. But really awareness as to why. Like, why are we seeking volatility? Because oftentimes it is the ugly discomfort, ugly comfort we know versus the wonderful discomfort that we don't know.
Yeah, it's like the craving, the calm, not the chaos, as that's
Exactly.
continuously the mantra of my life to everyone around
I hear
me.
you. I hear you.
Calm, not chaos. I want to talk about high functioning codependency.
Yeah.
This is a new thing that I discovered maybe a year ago, in which, because I'm hyper independent, I had never thought of myself as a codependent person because I am very self reliant. And then I listened to a few experts and realized that codependency at its core means you feel responsible for people around you. And once I understood that, I was like, oh, girl, you are a high functioning codependent, because I would feel very responsible for the people around me, not only my family members, friends, and I would try and save them from bad things happening to them. Or I'm very prescient. I can see what disaster is coming and I'm going to try and save you versus letting you have agency, make your own decisions, and be there and be supportive. And this shows up a lot in the professional space. I definitely, early in my career, felt a responsibility and loyalty to my bosses that oftentimes was blind in insofar as I was not being taken care of, but my codependency, I would prioritize the company or their needs over my own personal needs.
You just explained it so beautifully. I hope that it is in your book at some point because it feels like you really know how to speak to that so beautifully. But I had the exact same experience. I was so hyper independent when a therapist offered me a new definition of codependency. I was like, oh, this is not for me. Like, I don't think you understand. I'm like the most independent person. But yes, it was like feeling hyper responsible for people, trying to control other people's behaviors, trying to stop them from their own rock bottoms, which, newsflash, is all codependency.
Mhm.
And Terry Cole wrote this beautiful book last year, and I was so happy because I went to her book launch and her book came out like 2 or 3 weeks before my final draft was due. And I originally just had Melody Beattie's definition of codependency in the book, which a lot of people don't really identify with because it's very much in the addiction context.
Mhm.
But Terry Cole talks about high functioning codependence. And the behavioral traits look so different than what you think of as traditional codependent. And I was so happy that her book came out when it did because I was able to include the references in my own book. And so for a lot of us that are high functioning codependents that probably have never identified this way, we often feel like we can't say no, right? Like, okay, I have to do all the things. If I set a boundary, something bad's going to happen. I need to be in control, which you and I have talked about quite extensively here. Needing external validation to feel worthy, right? If I take care of this person, if I take care of this project, if I get this achievement, if I get this title, if I get this money, I'll feel worthy. Not putting ourselves first, right? So the example of you putting your bosses first, I did exactly the same thing. And I was like, okay, if I make work daddy or work mommy happy, I'll be okay, right? It's not how it works. Or like the need to be perfect, right? Thinking that if we are perfect at work, it'll make us somehow lovable in life.
What's so interesting is the shift that I went from, where I think it falls in the same bucket as codependency, is you over care at work, the level of responsibility you feel at work. When I started changing my framework to energetically neutral or joyful, if it was a neutral job, it was like, I'm doing an excellent job. I'm showing up, but you're not getting all of me. You're not
Yeah.
getting everything. I am saving that for my personal creative work. And I finally figured out how to do that, where I was like, nope, there's boundaries here. You don't get to get all of me. And I, especially when you're freelance, that allows you to not give all of you. I'm not a salaried employee. I'm not part of the team. I'm here to do a great job for this amount of time and then I'm leaving. And I've seen other friends who take on freelance jobs do what I used to do when I was salaried. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. And I've had to
Right.
explain to them, I'm like, why are you doing that? What is that serving? Is that serving you? Why are you acting like you're an employee and that you have opportunity for promotion here when you don't? And also, you don't want it.
Right. Exactly. And why are we showing up that way? Why are we behaving that way? And the thing that I think helps a lot of codependence is when you reframe it as when we do that, that is expected. That way of being and working is expected of everybody else. So we bring down the average, right? And, I think it also highlights that there's no right or wrong way to career, right? It's like you can have the good enough job that is joy neutral. So then you can save all of the joy for your creative and passion projects on the side, right? Or you can have the work that is joy positive, right? There's no right or wrong way to do it, but there is a way to be in right relationship with it.
Yeah. And I want to just also emphasize that I think for women and women of color, because it is so hard to succeed in the patriarchal culture to begin with, there is a level of wounded ambition that I think probably, you probably would know better than me, affects women more.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So I opened the conversation by talking about the ambition penalty, right? So ambitious women that negotiate their salary are seen as really difficult. Women of color are actually the most ambitious cohort in corporate America, but experience the most pushback. And what happens is that we experience, whether as a woman, a person of color, a queer person, a person with a disability, we experience so much systemic bias and we can often internalize it and weaponize it against ourselves, right? So when we were talking about the medical gaslighting, I'm like, I gaslit myself, right? Because I was so used to being gaslit. And the same thing happens in a work context of like, well, who am I to deserve more money, right? Everybody else is getting this thing, or who am I to want to take up more space? And so, we have to not just look at the spaces that we're operating in, but also the stories that we've internalized and maybe the bias that we're weaponizing against ourselves as well.
Yeah. What I tell my interns and the people that I mentor now, like, what would you tell like someone who's 21 graduating college? And I'm like, go where you're loved. That's one of the things that no one told me. I just was like, oh, this is a job. It's a good job. It's at a good company. It's good for my resume. And no one said, like, go where you're seen.
I love that so much. Nobody has ever said that, right? No one has ever said that. So beautiful. When I'm working with people and they are like reorganizing their teams or looking at their teams, I always love to talk about how there's like no right or wrong person, right? There's like square peg, round hole. And so, can you go to the place where it's like square peg, square hole, right? It's just that's all we need. There's nothing wrong with us, there's everything right with us. We just need to find the environments that are looking for exactly us. And there are environments that are.
100%. And it feels like dating sometimes. You're trying all these companies, but I think over time you also learn, what do I like? I'm a builder. I like being at a smaller company. I'm someone who's more of a corporate personality. I like being at a bigger company. You just start to figure out and narrow in, and then you start to see. But as I look back, I think if I had been in the right environments, I may not have been an entrepreneur, right? I was forced to entrepreneurship largely because I wasn't fitting into these systems.
Right. And that's a big part of the problem, right? Especially in the last year. I mean, during the pandemic, we saw this. We've been seeing it in the last year too. We saw in the last year 300,000 Black women in particular being pushed out of the workforce, right? And so, yes, so many environments aren't made for women, for people of color. And so then we turn to entrepreneurship as a place to be able to fully express, to have a bit more control over our own destinies because we haven't been allowed to ascend meaningfully inside of these organizations. I talked about this in the book, but one of my good friends, Ruchika Tulsian Malhotra, she wrote a series of articles for HBR that was basically like, it's about imposter syndrome. And it was essentially like, stop trying to fix women at work and instead let's fix the places where women work, right? If we are making
Yes.
space for all people and we cultivate psychological safety and belonging for all people, we probably have less people turning to entrepreneurship because they would feel more comfortable, right? I think entrepreneurship is so wonderful because it drives a lot of opportunity, but what if people didn't have to turn to it?
That's right. I really enjoy being an entrepreneur for now, but I also really enjoyed a level of security. There's all types, which some people might find they like the path of building their own hours, making their own schedule, managing people. But a lot of people would stay in the system. And so I think you lose out on that. And obviously, all the systems are crumbling right now. We need a big reassessment across the board. But what I think women are drawn to is this idea that I'm in control of my financial future. I'm not relying on as many variables in a system that wasn't built for me to define my financial future.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
I can stand in my bigness. This podcast, obviously, it's called Too Much for a reason. We're taking back this idea that women are too much. We're not.
Right.
We just are. And we've been in a system that feels threatened by the bigness, by the
Totally.
intelligence, by the innovation. And a lot of people, because of that system, are afraid of their bigness. They're
Mhm.
afraid of being fully seen and stepping into their full power. And so, how do we support people in owning that more in a system that doesn't support that?
think that we have to own it first, right? And I hesitate to say this, and I say this about the ambition framework too. It's like we always want to look at our side of the street, but I never want women in particular to download more work onto their shoulders without us also talking about how the system has to change, because I think that just perpetuates more toxicity. So it's a both and. But what we can do is we can start with us, right? And so I think it's really important that we look at our side of the street. I really love internal family systems work, aka parts work, right? Because it's the idea that we have all of these parts inside of ourselves. We have, like, I have a perfectionistic part, I have a controlling part, I have a vulnerable part, right? We have all of these parts inside of ourselves. And for some of them, we are rewarded, and for some of them, we are shamed. And so, if there is a part for which you have been shamed, it is probably not right sized. And so, then when we have an experience that bumps up against that part, we might have an outsized reaction, right? And so, if we're wanting to own more of our bigness, we have to take away any pain or shame that there is around our bigness. Because we all have versions of that, right? Just by virtue of growing up in a patriarchy, you are going to have in some way be shamed in some way for your identity, for your authenticity. And so we have to take the charge out of those stories, because otherwise we're going to be constantly dysregulated anytime somebody bumps up against even it in the tiniest way.
Really about safety.
Yeah, 100%. Safety is a really hard word, right? Because it is, like, in many ways perceived safety. And then also there are spaces where we are legitimately unsafe to be
Yeah,
ourselves.
yeah, 100%, 100%. It reminds me of, we had an Amina on the podcast who is a neuroplasticity coach, and she
Amazing.
said how she believes that people are not inherently lazy. They just don't feel perceived safety to take action.
Yeah, and then it's essentially, I think lazy is interesting. It can manifest as a freeze response for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Like, I'm not taking action because I'm frozen.
So parts work is such a great suggestion. Really beautiful stuff if people haven't checked it out. And so we've talked a lot about the painful ambition. Let's talk about purposeful ambition and the principles of that.
Okay, great, great. And again, just a reminder, it's not an all or nothing proposition. Some environments bring the best out of us and some do not. Okay, so purposeful ambition, on the other hand, we question the systems that shape us. So, like we've been doing in this conversation, right? Of like, oh, have I internalized bias and am I weaponizing it against myself? That's a good thing for me to know. We have an expansive growth mindset. So we're not in that black and white either or. Instead of being driven by winning no matter the cost, we're driven by purpose. Instead of being focused on individualism, we are collaborative and we use our gifts to help the world. We recognize that each and every one of us has a zone of genius. And when we come together in those zones of genius together, we can actually be more effective versus us all fighting to be seen and to win. Instead of instrumentalizing ourselves and others, we honor our needs. And it's so wild, but this is still by far and away one of the most challenging ones for my clients, because they go so far and so long without their needs being met. But we can't really do much if we haven't had our needs met. And needs, again, is it's almost like safety. It's a very interesting word, right? Because from a nervous system context, our needs are very basic, right? It's like
Right.
water, shelter, clothes. But to thrive, our needs are different. And that's the conversation that we're in. And then instead of moving at unsustainable or self imposed urgency, we take aligned action. So we decide, we take an action, we observe what happens, and then we take another action. And we continue to move forward really consciously.
Can we talk about aligned action? How do we know that the steps we're taking are aligned?
So in the book, when it comes to purposeful work, there's this 5-part framework that I have. So purposeful work needs to leverage our zone of genius. It needs to meet our needs. It needs to be connected to the impact that we want to have, be values aligned, and it also needs to help us cultivate a sense of contentment. And so if we're operating in that space and we're taking steps inside of that space, we're probably operating in a space of alignment. And it's not at all about perfectionism, right? One of my friends, Megan Hellerer, wrote this book called Directional Living, and she talks about making a directionally correct, or basically like moving directionally versus moving destinationally. So when we move destinationally, we're like, oh my God, I want to be the president. And you haven't taken a single step. You've just decided you want this thing, right? This is 1,000 steps away. But when we move directionally, we take an action, we observe what happens as a result of that action, then we take another action. And then we manifest our reality as a result of that, right? And we keep checking in with ourselves, and like, in my work, I think we keep checking in with those 5 parts to be like, does this leverage my gifts? Oh, are my needs met? Does it values aligned? Okay, let me take another step in that direction. So to me, that's what aligned action looks like.
Very helpful. I love the values piece, and I also love the idea of living in your zone of genius, which is being of service and doing something bigger than you. I think that's a piece that gets confusing.
Yes. And I also think like now is the time more than ever. I keep saying to my clients, I'm like, the jig is up, right? Like we are done dialing it in. The world just needs us to like step up. Let's go. But purpose feels like such a heavy, huge, like, what does that even mean? And especially for those of us that are rumbled with perfectionism, did I get it right? Right. I think that purpose is more of a constellation than a singular North Star.
Mhm.
My friend Michael Ventura talks about that. And so, really, allow yourself to have a constellation of purpose and just to keep taking aligned action towards it versus being like, I've got to get this right. Like, what is the perfect through line of this lifetime?
Yeah. And the distinction that you make, which I have made as well, is the idea that we are chasing contentment, not happiness. I think happiness is this big word that we feel like we should be euphoric all the time. And the reality is you're more like this. Happiness is something that happens in between the line of contentment, but we should be chasing for contentment.
Yeah, and, like, I'd like the word chasing, right? It's like,
Yeah.
um, so when I was
Yes.
looking at contentment
Erase that word. I didn't say that.
when I was looking at the research, right, there's this word that comes from Eastern Bhutan and it's Chokshay, and when you translate it into English, it translates as unconditional wholeness or the knowledge of enough. And so it's so
Mhm.
beautiful, right? Because it's this idea regardless of the accolades that we achieve and whatever we get in our lives, we were born whole. And I say
Mhm.
this to my clients all the time, right? It's like when a baby comes into the world, you never look at that baby and be like, "Ugh, not whole or worthy because it didn't get a paycheck," right? It's like we were born worthy, but we have all this layering of programming on top of us that tells us we need to be a certain way to be worthy, but we are unconditionally whole. And so it's that constant reminder, the constant knowledge that we are enough and that we have enough, right? It
Right.
doesn't mean that we can't have a desire for more life, which is how I define ambition, right? But it's holding both and of I know that I am unconditionally whole. I have this knowledge of enough. And at the same time, it would be so lovely to have a bit more life.
I finally realized that I had maybe crossed the chasm over to purposeful ambition when I didn't feel that insatiable hunger. I was like, this is the rest of my life. Would this be enough? With a desire for more life.
Yeah.
And I realized in that place where I was like, no, this is pretty good. I'm pretty close. And it was the first time in my life because I think I always felt like contentment was really far away. Like maybe I
Mhm.
would never feel content.
Yeah.
And over the past year, I'm like, oh, we are close. We are finding that beautiful sweet spot of contentment, which I'm grateful for because I never really thought it was something that I would ever be able to hold, to be honest.
So beautiful. And I also think it's like a moment to moment practice too, where it's like some moments I really feel that too. And then there's some contexts or moments where I don't feel that. And I'm like, okay, great. This is information for me for something that I need to look at. Right. So like in my experience, I find that that does vacillate a little bit and that's okay too.
Yeah. And before we wrap up here, I do want to just touch base on the myth of the passion principle. I think that's an
Mm.
important distinction for people to leave with as we talk about purpose. You don't want people to conflate that with passion necessarily.
Yes, I am like, I do feel, I wonder if you felt this way too, but in so much of entrepreneurial communities that I've been a part of, they often put those two things together and they are so different. So, what I talk about in the book is that passion by nature is fickle. It is changing. It is evolving all the time, right? I always use the example that after my health crisis, I went to nutrition school, right? Because I was passionate about it at the time. But like, did I need to hang my entire life on that? No. So let yourself be passionate about the things that you're passionate about and let that change, let that evolve. And purpose is agile too, to a certain degree, but it is more stable, right? And I think that we get into some tricky business around passion too, because we hear the mantra of like, do what you're passionate about and you'll never work a day in your life. And then people are willing to shortchange their needs, right? They'll take the job that they're passionate about, but doesn't cover their basic needs or the right salary for them. But they're like, oh, I love this thing. And then it becomes like a conversation of privilege, right? Where only certain people can actually gamble on passion because it requires that you have a wealthy spouse or a trust fund or all these things, right? And so I think that it's misguided to invite people to hang their hat on passion alone. I think it's a wonderful thing. It has a role in our lives, but it is not stable. And so it's not meant to be built upon in the same way as purpose.
We're allowed to be like lifelong learners. We're allowed to explore things. And as your work, right, led you to infuse some of those principles into the core purpose that made sense in like passionate hobbies that you were trying out. And I
Right.
find the exploration often leads into the greater purpose. I took voice lessons for fun. I'm passionate about that. I had the time of my life. I am definitely not a singer. That is not the gift I was here to give, but it does inform how I speak, how I breathe, how I show up, and it has principles I can use in my more purposeful ambition.
So beautifully said. Like, that's such a great example.
Yeah. This was awesome. I've had the time of my life talking to you.
Oh, that's same. I only wish that we wore NYU t-shirts to record this. That's
I
my only wish.
do I do have one that I wear to bed. Well, we can do that next time. I so appreciate you coming and expanding our understanding and giving us better terminology for people to dig into. Thank you for doing this beautiful work. It's so helpful.
Oh my gosh, thank you for doing this beautiful work and using your gifts in this way and then therefore shining a light on my work. I'm so grateful. And thank you so much to everybody that was tuning in today. I really appreciate it.
And where can everyone find you?
Thank you. If you would like to learn more about coaching, you can visit my website, AminaAlTai.com. I'm sure the spelling will be in the show notes. And then you can find my book everywhere you buy books. It's called The Ambition Trap, How to Stop Chasing and Start Living. And then you can also find me on Instagram at Amina AlTai.
Awesome. We will put everything in the show notes and we will see you soon.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you do like listening, it would mean the world to us if you could subscribe or review the podcast anywhere that you watch or listen to the podcast. It really helps with the algorithm to share this with the world. I want to give a special thank you to young Spielberg and Sarah Yarkin for their beautiful work on our opening jingle, Dana Boulos for her help with the beautiful art, and to all of you for tuning in and keeping this dream alive. If you want to hear certain topics or from certain guests, please feel free to email us. We really, really want to hear from you and see how we can best support you. See you next time.